I just got on the school bus and they dropped me off. There's a shop right down the street here, and they dropped me off at the shop, and they were like, "Does your dad know you're here?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, he knows. Don't worry about it. It's fine." Right? You're a 7-year-old, and they're like, and so I show up, and he's actually, changing irrigation sets in the 4-wheeler, and he's like, sees me, and he's like, "Where's your mom?" And I was like, "Oh, I came to help."
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast.
This week, we hear the story of a guy who grew up as a farm worker. His family came from Mexico, and now he and his dad run an orchard together, and he's involved in the world of agricultural technology. Very cool story. Meet Pedro Cuevas this week here on the Real Food, Real People podcast. I'm Dillon, and this is documenting my journeys all over Washington State to get to know the real people behind our food. I want to talk with you about all the cool technology that you work with in your career now. But before that, I want to go back to the beginning of your story, which starts in Mexico, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, parents started back in Mexico, and my dad started coming out here when he was 18 years old. Started coming to work, and had my sister. My sister was born down in Mexico. Then my second to eldest sister also was born in Mexico, but my dad would come back and go, kind of like most of, Mexican stories. It was where, they have to come back. Mom was 16, 17 and had to stay back with the kids and raise them without no communication, nothing. They didn't have cell phones that we have now, right? No.
How long would he be away?
The whole season. So, I mean, usually about February to November, right?
Wow.
Just go and you hear them tell stories about how they used to write letters to each other, right? And it'd take them a month to get it.
Yeah.
Because not only are you, 1,000 miles away, but you're also, right, international. So it takes a long time now to send something down there. You can imagine back in, 82, 83, right?
Yeah.
So.
And did he do any farming or anything? Did he have that background in Mexico?
He did. He did a lot of, he worked with cattle. And then did papaya. He was really familiar with papaya, so he did papaya work. And so, I mean, he was pretty much raised out in the campos, as we like to say in Spanish, right? But needed the money, wanted to get married, and wanted a nice wedding. So he's like, well, I got to go to the United States, and that's the only way we're going to achieve it. So that's when he started coming out here, because he said he was going to pay for his wedding all by himself, right? So,
nice.
So that's when he started coming out here, and, it just... From there, I was born here and actually in Washington State. I was born in Walla Walla, and that's where he lived. And believe it or not, we lived in Walla Walla. Family lived from 88 to about, I want to say it was about 92 in Walla Walla. And my dad would actually drive from Walla Walla to this exact orchard every single day. Which, if you put that into a map, it's about 2.5-hour drive one way, right? So
that's a lot of time and a lot of gas.
Exactly. Oh. And he talks about, and it's going to be one day it's going to be his dream come true. But he had a Gran Torino that he used to drive, and so I want to make that happen for him one day, right? Get him back, get him back in the Gran Torino. But he said it was 5-hour commute till he actually found something here in Royal City that he can come back and, be a lot closer to the family. Yep. But even then, you think about it, and I still remember when I was a little kid, about 6, 7 years old, he would spend a lot of time at this orchard, right? He would be gone when I would wake up. And when he'd come home, I was already asleep, right? So it was, even though he was closer to home, you really never see him unless it was a Sunday, right? About the only time, and I tell this story a lot because it's kind of crazy that, when you grow up in this kind of atmosphere in reality, and maybe you experienced it yourself where you wanted to get out of it because you were kind of tired or frustrated of it, where, you were around it all the time, but it always comes back. And I like to tell this story because I wouldn't see my dad, right? We lived in an apartment complex there in town in Royal City, and, it was just hard. And one day I decided to take the bus from the school to here. I found out that these neighbors right over here, where they were going. So I knew who they were. Yeah. And I said, hey, I'm going to take your bus and I'm going to go. And
what kind of a bus was it?
It was a school bus. So I just got on the school bus and they dropped me off. There's a shop right down the street here, and they dropped me off at the shop, and they were like, "Does your dad know you're here?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, he knows. Don't worry about it. It's fine." Right? You're a 7-year-old, and they're like, and so I show up, and he's actually, changing irrigation sets in the 4-wheeler, and he's like, sees me, and he's like, "Where's your mom?" And I was like, "Oh, I came to help you because I want to get you home earlier, right?"
Yeah.
And back then, cherries used to be irrigated with drain, and small pipes, and so he was like, "All right, you want to help me?" He's like, "Jump on," and we go down the 4-wheeler, and he started at one end, and I started at the other end, and we started going, and I mean, I probably didn't help much, but at least I got to spend time with my dad and see my dad.
Yeah.
And at the long run, ended up bringing him home faster, and he tells me now that I have kids, like, enjoy it, man, because I didn't, right? I was working hard for you guys, and and he's like, so whatever you can do, take him to Disneyland, take him to Silverwood, whatever you can do, because he's like, I know I did it, and I definitely regret that now. So
yeah, my dad says the same thing.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy.
I worked too much.
Yeah,
back in those days. So was he mad that you had come out?
He was, at first he was, but then he kind of laughed about it. He was, like, "Oh man, that's crazy. They drop you off right here." But hey, it was, the bus drop off was about 4:30 p.m. So you can imagine what time he would get home if he was still changing irrigation sets at 4:30. Right.
But then you kept coming back. He kept having you out to the field.
Yeah, I would come about 2-3 times a week at least to try to come help him and try to, like I said, try to get him home earlier. Yeah.
So that's when you decided you like this farming thing?
Well, I don't think so. Not necessarily, man. I wanted to do something else and kind of, because after that it wasn't, till you were about 15, then you really get down into, doing the shovel work and everything. You're like, man, this is not fun, right? You start thinning apples and your thumbs hurt at the end of the day. You're like, oh man, or during cherry season, you're carrying cherry lugs and walking them around, and at the end of the day, you're beat. You're like, oh man, I don't want to do this. And that's the reason why my dad did it, because he's like, I want you guys to go to college, and I want you guys to know what hard work is. Mm-hmm. So I did it. I think about right around 16, I think I actually started hating it, and just like, man, this sucks. All my friends during spring break and summer vacation were going on vacations, and I was staying here because I had to work, right? But we also didn't have the cash flow that everybody else had, so you had to, right? Like if you wanted nice things, new shoes and everything during, the beginning of the school season, you had to, you had to work for your money, and all my siblings went through it. I went through it, and yeah, and sure enough, man, when I graduated, I was like, I'm out of here. This is not for me. But something, it's crazy. Something brought me back. I kind of did what I wanted to try to do, right? And I'm glad I did it, because if I wouldn't have done it, I kind of would have, probably been like this whole time. Yeah.
What did you do?
So I actually, when I went to college, I went for my law enforcement degree. Mm-hmm. There wasn't, during that time, 2012, there wasn't any openings, right? Mm-hmm. It was hard to get in. Yep. You had to do either like a reserve deputy or just wait till you got hired on, right? And and so we tried that route and ended up getting into retail. And I was okay at it, I'd like to say, and kind of, I liked it. I liked interacting with people and meeting new people every day and everything. So that was fun, but I wasn't happy, right? And I'd come back home and I'd talk to my dad. I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't think this is for me. I make decent money, but it's just like sometimes it's not about the money. It's about, feeling happy. And he's like, one day he was like, well, you're always complaining. And he's like, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. I said, I really don't know. And he's like, well, what do you know? I'm like, well, it's a good question. I don't know, man. And he's like, you know, farming pretty darn well. You grew up around it. He's like, why don't you try to get back into the orchard and try to do something with that? And so that's kind of when I started looking back into it, and applied with a local chemical company, become a fieldman, and did that for a little bit, and then helped out around here some, and stumbled upon Semios one day. Actually at a gas station, saw Semios pick up, and I was like, I wonder what they do. And so I went on their website, saw Michael Gilbert, the CEO. I saw some YouTube videos actually. And And I Googled it, and he came up, and I saw his vision. I said, hey, that sounds pretty cool, man. Tried to do the technology, and you also get to be, in farms and agriculture and get to interact with people. Like that's kind of ties everything together of what I wanted to do. Right.
Totally.
So I applied, and a couple months later I was hired on. So been with the company for 5 years now. Started, in January of, what would have been January 17, and kind of taken off from there. I remember the company was really small, 28th employee hired at Semios. Crazy to think now, because we were just talking about it the other day, but over 300 employees at Semios right now.
Where are they based?
Later. They're based out of Vancouver, Canada.
Okay.
Yep. Cool story. You should definitely have our CEO one day on your podcast, because he has a real cool story of how everything came about.
Well, I know I saw the logo around for a while. I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I was curious, like you were. And then once I looked it up, and I think I maybe talked with somebody who had some background about what you guys do. I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to try to explain it. You explain it. What is Semios all about?
So initially it was a strong push for a mating disruption company, right? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with mating disruption or not, but it's a pheromone that here, at least primarily in apples, it's codly moth, and we do other pests as well. But it's the scent, the sex pheromone that the female releases when they're trying to get mated, right? Mm-hmm. So what you do is you go and you hang these things up, and you release it at the right timing, depending on degree days and the phenology of the moth and everything. And you can, we kind of took it to the next level, where instead of it, just kind of dispensing every once in a while throughout the night, it's actually dispensing, according to what the phenology of the moth is doing, right?
Wow.
So we took it there, but now we're so much broader. There's, we do temperature by the acre now. Right. We involved so much more models in it, not only the degree day model, we have fire blight model available. We have a bunch of different things that do that. And, last year, the company kind of took the next step and acquired a couple companies. They acquired a fan control company named Alltrack. They acquired a record keeping company, Aprex, which is based out of Wenatchee, and another record keeping company, AgWorld, that they're based actually out of Australia, which is super exciting for somebody that started, when they were so young, and kind of taking off. I think here at the company, if you look at it, the possibilities are really endless right now at this point, because we gather so much data within even an hour. Even if you're not even talking about, the day, you're talking about an hour, because our system is actually updating and reporting every 10 minutes. So
it's about like having sensors all over your field, so you don't just have one temperature for the whole field, because it can vary widely, especially depending on the terrain in the orchards out here, from the way I understand it. And then like having extensive, detailed, updated by the hour, by the minute data can totally change, I'm assuming, how people farm.
Exactly. And I think that's the ultimate goal. And that's why I say I think it would be good for you to kind of get in contact with our CEO, because his vision is next level, right? Like he wants to be able, it kind of sounds lazy, but he wants to be able for a farmer to be able to farm from his phone, right? Which is what we're getting to, especially with overtime laws and not having employees. I mean, here at a small orchard, that my dad owns and operates, it's hard, right? We had harvest last year, and we didn't get a single local show up and say,
not a single local
not
worker.
A single one. And usually, which is surprising to us, but because we'll have anywhere from 30 to 35 people show up and be like, hey, yeah, there's a ladder, grab it, go for it. But not last year, not a single one. I was here every single day, and not a single person showed up and said, hey, you got work available.
Why is that? Just other jobs that people can get that they prefer to do?
I think that's a real good question, and I think that's what everybody's trying to kind of figure out, because they're even not only in the farming industry, but look at restaurants, right? Yeah. Look at these, even Walmarts of the world, right? You see it, they're closing at 11 when they used to be 24 hours. I think it's a great question, and if we could figure it out, it would be awesome before. Looks like these are going to be probably ready to pick in like early June. So if we can figure it out before early June, I would appreciate
quick, hurry up.
Yeah.
So, what do you do then? If you can't get any local workers to help, how do you make things happen?
Yeah. Last year we had to use a contractor. So we brought a contractor out, and luckily they were able to help us, and they were even struggling for employees. They had some brand new people that never even used the ladder, right? And never picked a cherry in their life. So it was hard. First couple of days were very, very difficult because, like I said, most of the people there were new, and they were, when a good picker will pick 30, 35 lugs, in a day. These guys are picking 10 and 12, right? Yeah. So it's going to take you a lot longer, and it's going to be a lot more expensive too in the long run if they don't figure it out. But we were lucky enough to get it off and right before it rained, actually. So
so were those guest workers then from Mexico, or were they from other parts of the country, or where?
Yeah, so at that point we kind of leave it to the contracting service to see what they prefer to do. I know half of their crew was the H2A program from Guatemala. The other half were locals. I know they had a bunch of employees kind of spread out everywhere. So I think that's the reason they did it. They did it that way. But half of the crew knew what they were doing, the other half didn't. So that was the challenge.
Yeah. What do you think of that guest worker program? There's been a lot of controversy about that. Yeah. But when I talk with people who've actually been doing it, they're like pumped because they get to make a bunch of money and take it home.
Right. Yeah. I think it's actually great. We actually have family members that come through the H2A program to come work to the United States, and you can see it. We try to go to Mexico at least every year, every December. Kind of like a family tradition. We get down there during Christmas and stuff. And
still a family down there to visit?
Yeah, a lot of family actually, and you see it down there too, right? You start seeing houses being built, and just the economy down there is uplifting, right? Like roads are getting redone, and you got light posts now, which before you never used to see. And
what's that from?
From the H2A program.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you used to drive down the street, in a street there in our hometown, and houses would be made out of a palm tree wood, which is the cheapest wood you can find, right? Yeah. And, you can see right through the wall because palm trees aren't straight, and they wouldn't bother to make them straight. Yep. And so they would hold them up with barbed wire, right? And that's how houses were made, and that's how you can see them. There's still some. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still quite a bit of houses like that, but the good thing is you start seeing, brick houses coming up and everything, and it's the H2A workers that are coming up and saving enough money to start building their house.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think it's great. I think, it helps out here, the local economy. Royal City is about 2,200 people, so it's not very big. Yep. H2A program comes, I think we jump up to like 3,500 people. So it helps out the economy here because they're buying food from Royal City and gas and everything, and it helps the economy down there wherever they're from in Mexico.
So workers don't feel trapped or mistreated or exploited. I mean, what do you hear from the guys in the program?
I got a cousin and an uncle that have been doing it for 8 years now, right? And they're happier than heck to come every single year, right? Like not because they're gonna get away from their family. That's kind of the downfall, right? Is you get away from your family, but you send them good amount of money that you'd never make down there, right? Like. For example, my dad has banana orchards down in Mexico, and those guys are making $300 pesos a day, which ends up being like $15 here. So that's what they're making. So if you compare that, even if they make $100 a day here, right? It's like that's probably what they would make in a month almost.
You're probably making a lot more than that though, especially like with production bonuses and stuff.
Right, and their minimum wage is a lot higher than everybody else's too when you have an H2A program. So they're making $16 an hour, right? Starting. Yeah. So it's like they don't make that in a whole day with what they make in an hour here. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. Right.
Just briefly pausing to thank our sponsors, Dairy Farmers of Washington, for one. They've got a cool thing coming up if you haven't heard about it. It's like a farm tour where you can get up close and personal with real Washington dairy farms and dairy farmers coming up in June. You can find out more details at wadairy.org. Go check it out. We really appreciate their support from the Dairy Farmers of Washington as they do something similar to what we do here, highlighting the quality food that's grown here and the people that grow it and the sustainability that they try and work to achieve as they're producing food here locally in Washington State. Also, Mana Insurance Group, working with lots of local farms and everyone else in between, businesses, and certainly a lot of personal needs that they provide for and help with, including mine, helping me find the right insurance to protect my family's future, financial future, rather than just waiting until things go wrong. They're helping me and so many others have a plan in place ahead of time to make sure we're prepared and things, even when things are bad, that there is least as little bad as possible, to put it in kind of normal speak, if you will. ManaInsuranceGroup.com. Check them out online. They have locations here in Washington as well as Arizona and California. Now back to our conversation in Royal City, Washington with Pedro Cuevas. What about, talking about the whole labor thing, what about this? You mentioned overtime. What's the deal with that? Because they rolled out, this tiered system where every year it's working its way down to getting time and a half over 40 hours. Yep. I think this year it's
55,
55 and 48 next year. How is that affecting farms, and how is it affecting workers too? Because, initially I think a lot of people thought workers would be pumped because they'd be making more money.
Right. Yeah. I think it's bad, actually. I think small farms like ours aren't going to make it. We're not going to have the capital be able to pay overtime. And we're not there. We talked about labor. We have no labor to be able to break it out into shifts, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, how are we going to do it? Either we're going to do the work for free, or we're just going to have to sell our farm, which you already start seeing a lot of these farms that are smaller growers are going to investment companies because they're the only ones that can afford it, right? They're not going to be able to afford, paying after 55, especially when you're like in irrigation season and the guys are out here from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m., right? Yeah. So it's going to be really challenging. The people aren't really happy about it.
Why not? I mean, so wouldn't it mean if you get time and a half,
right? But
make more money?
Yeah, I mean, it should technically be that way in the retail scenario, but here you can't apply those same rules, right? You got now it's for example, irrigation. These things have to go on. Sometimes it's 82, 83 degrees at 9 in the morning, right? So you're turning on overhead cooling for the apples not to get sun scalded, and you're gonna run it from then and all the way down to it cools off, right, till it gets under 82 degrees, and that could be 8 p.m., right? Yeah. So now what are you gonna do? Now you're gonna, because you really can't afford to be paying somebody overtime, right? Before you could pay them, the hourly rate was fine, right? They can work 80 hours a week if they wanted to, and there'd be no problem, because it would be the same even if you were to break it out into shifts. Now you're gonna have to break it out into shifts, right? Mm-hmm. So now you're paying two different people. Now you got to think about the W-2s. You got to think about what if at the end of the season they have to go on unemployment. So now you're paying 2 unemployment. So it's gonna be real hard.
What about for the worker though? Then they're on a shift and they get fewer hours.
Exactly. So the irrigation guy that used to get 80 hours, now they're gonna get 40 hours, right? And they're not. They're gonna have to go find another shift somewhere else at another orchard that's gonna be willing to give them another 40 hours, right? So it's not gonna be the same, and that they're not gonna end up making the same amount of money.
What are you hearing from people? Are they frustrated about that? Yeah. Folks who are doing work.
Yep. My dad has had an irrigator here that's been here as long as he has, and he's gonna call it quits because once it gets down to that 40 hours, he's like, I'm not gonna be able to do that, man. Like I can't be jumping from orchard to orchard just because now I get to only work 40 hours. Yeah. Right. And so he's like, I'm just gonna go back to Mexico and live my life down there because it's not worth trying all the hassle and all the extra work that I have to do. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. I guess that's the disconnect, because the story that you're telling is very different than I think a lot of people have seen it, and that's the reason why we've ended up here.
Right.
People don't understand the world of farming has its own kind of rhythm, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's so much, variable things that go into farming that, that guy, that same irrigation guy everything can be going great, and he can be within, 39 hours, and then a main valve breaks, right? And then you're like, oh, you got to go dig that up, right? Yep. And you have to patch it up, and it's like, that's not an hour job, right? Yep. it's a couple hours, 6 hours. And what is he going to do? Is he just going to drop it and leave it because he hit his 40 hours and now he has to leave, right? And the grower's not going to want to pay him the overtime because he can't afford it, right? It's not that he doesn't want to. We'd love to pay everybody overtime, but we don't have the money to do it, right?
Yep.
Commodity prices aren't there. COVID really hit it, and so we haven't been back up. And it seems like everywhere, you look, it's kind of the same story, right? You talk to a bunch of people and everybody has the same story with, it's just, it hasn't been the market that I was, 6 years ago, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, plus I'm just thinking like the annual rhythm of farming too. There are hours and money to be made at a certain time of year. Right. Well, in the middle of the winter, there's nothing going on out here, right? Exactly. So then how are you making money?
Yeah. I mean, we've been lucky that we've had mild winters and we've been able to keep people busy. But when it's been a heavy winter, it's like, they're just stuck at home. They're actually calling us and they're like, hey, can we go work on weekends? Like this weekend looks like it's going to be all right, because people, rely on that money and that's what their savings accounts, it starts getting really slim and, they got no other option but to work.
Yeah. Well, that's why 40 hours a week works for a factory.
Right.
Because it's week in, week out, year round.
Right.
But you got to make the money when you can, because then there are times when you can't, and it often comes out to the same number of hours, same number of dollars, but it's a different system than a factory. And who wants it to be a factory? Right? This is the natural world where you're growing food.
Exactly. We're going to be sitting here right now, and that cloud looks like it's going to rain, and what are we going to do? We're going to get up and leave because we can't be here, right? It's the same thing when you're out. You're not going to risk, people's health because, you only have 40 hours and this is what you're going to get, right? Yep. You're going to say, okay, well, you know what, it started raining, go ahead and go home, and now you only got 6 hours, right? But then during the summer when there is a lot to do, you got thinning going on, you got cherry harvest and people that have apricots going on. And it's like, you have to have those people out there. And so if not, what are you going to do? Are you going to bring in more H2As? Right? Because we don't have any more locals, right? Yep. So it's like, what are you going to start doing?
And that's expensive to do.
It's really expensive.
Which boggles my mind when people say, oh, it's the cheap way out for farms to do that. And they're doing that to save money. It's like, if I look at the numbers, it costs a lot more yet.
You have to house them, transport them. And you have to pay a higher minimum wage to have them around. It definitely, we've been offered to get H2As here, but one, we're not considered big enough. It would definitely help, but two, it's too expensive. Right. There's no way we could be able to afford it for a small farm like ours.
What do you think people need to know about this world of farming? Like we were talking about the disconnect, and a lot of it is just because a lot of people aren't around it anymore. Right. They live in a city, and maybe they love to see it up close and personal, but they can't.
Yeah, I mean, I would invite them out here any day of the week. Right, they can come out and they can ride with me. They can ride with my dad, and they can see what farming is really about. It's not. It's not where it's like a 9 to 5 where you just lock yourself in a building and you're good to go, right? Doesn't matter what happens. It could be, a couple of weeks ago we tried to get together and we couldn't because I had to be out here with farmers and myself trying to protect these crops from frost, right? Yeah. I remember first call was 11:30 saying, hey, it's cold out, right? And then finally didn't actually get done with my stuff and with grower stuff till about 6:30 in the morning.
Wow. So all night long.
All night long. And that was 3 nights in a row.
And what do you do because it was too cold, it was going to freeze the blooms of the cherries?
Correct. Yeah. So it would frost out, it would kill all the cherries. And if you don't try to do anything, then you're out of crop, right? And I do know a couple of farms that just kind of threw their hands up in the air because, we talked about labor and everybody's running into it. The propane companies, they were only coming here filling 25% tanks because they didn't have enough labor to go fill them 100%, right?
Wow.
So they'd only go...
The tanks that power the
propane tanks, yep.
Because they use propane for the big fans?
Correct, yeah. Yep. So they would bring, because that's all the time they had. So literally 25%, right? Because it only takes about half an hour to get 25%. And then they would jump to the next one and they'd go like that. And you can look out here and, in Royal City and the whole valley, you can probably stand in a high point and you can see there's thousands of fans out here, right? And they had to get to all of them.
Those are those big, like windmill looking things.
Machines,
but that's not to catch wind and turn it into power.
No,
it's not. Because it stirs up the air.
Correct. Yep.
So the cold air doesn't settle out and freeze the field.
Yep.
If I understand it right.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. So you got to mix that hot air with the cold air That way you can keep it at a higher temperature. You try not to get frost out, just depending on time of year, you know, and where the bud is at, the fruit bud is at, that's how, when you turn on the fan. So right now you're about 32 degrees, anything about 32, under 32 is gonna kill your fruit. So that's what we're about in cherries. About 2 weeks ago, we're about 32, and we have, you know, we walked this field before here. We have quite a bit of damage, and it does not look good.
But you never know. This is
Right.
at least what my dad said in raspberries. I'm guessing it applies here. You never really know until harvest shows up what's actually going to be out there.
Right.
So you're
That's
probably
exactly
crossing
right.
your fingers at this point, just hoping that damage doesn't.
Yeah,
who knows?
It's curious and funny because 4 years ago we had the same thing happen, and we had the lightest crop we had ever had, and we actually made more money than we ever had. Right?
Why?
Well, because crop load wasn't there for everybody.
So then the price went up.
So price was really high.
Yeah.
So that was real interesting, and so we can keep our fingers crossed that we have a better crop, or that same thing happens, right, where it drives the price up because there isn't enough to supply the whole market.
Yeah, it's just always something.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, you can never rest.
Yeah. Sure. So, and wasn't there even snow out here?
Yeah, there was. We got about 3 inches of snow. These cherry trees were, and both the cherries and apple trees were completely covered in snow, and we had never seen that. My dad says, he's like, I've been farming for 30 years. I've never seen snow in April.
That's nuts.
Yeah, but can't mess with Mother Nature, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, there's only so much you can do.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, and thanks for what you do, too. I mean, this is gorgeous out here. The view, of course, people on the video can't see it, but out across the valley is just incredible.
Yeah.
I have to sneak back around here sometime when there's fresh fruit and check it out.
Yeah, you're welcome to come anytime, man. I mean, we got apples, we got cherries, and we got a little bit of peach trees within between, just for the family and for friends, you know, to come and get some fresh peaches. But anytime, you're welcome back anytime.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast. These are the stories of the people who grow your food.